Now that Eddie George has made the jump from FCS to FBS, other celebrity coaches have a way more realistic blueprint to follow, and I expect them to try to follow it. Oh, yeah, it's locked on HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darrion Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me, making Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by TurboTax. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head over to turbotax.com today and get matched with your expert. We'll wrap up today's episode by just previewing the MEAC tournament, both on the men's and women's side, things that I'm looking for in segment 2. It won't be technically a preview, but it's a question that relates to the MEAC tournament. How in the world did Norfolk State get the number 1 seed on the men's side? I got questions and I need answers. I haven't got these answers yet. So in segment 1, I want to kick this thing off with the biggest story of the week, the biggest story of the year, however you want to phrase it. Eddie George leaving Tennessee State. We've looked at what this means for the school. We've looked at what this means for the person, the coach in Eddie George. We've looked at all of these things, and we also looked at replacement options. But the truth of the matter is, when you have a coach like Eddie George, it doesn't just impact Tennessee State. It has an impact on Norfolk State. It has an impact on Delaware State. I'm still wondering if Tennessee State tries to strike lightning twice in the same place. I would really be interested to see if they say, I would go grab another coach with limited experience, but has that NFL pedigree. It worked for you. And I don't necessarily know if they have a plan for when their coach leaves the same way that Jackson State had a plan and FAMU kind of had a plan. I think different people in there had different plans. So I don't want to say that FAMU just had a plan because it wasn't this agreed upon situation. But I don't know if they had a guy in place that they were going to go back to. But anyway, enough of that because that's not what we're talking about today. What we're talking about today is the fact that Eddie George is out of Tennessee State, and the path that he took away from the Tigers is one that I could easily see Michael Vick taking away from the Spartans. I could see Desean Jackson taking away from Delaware State, the Delaware State Hornets. Here's the thing. All of these people want to climb the totem pole. I've seen an interesting tweet, man. I think it was Blue, and I think it was HBC Blue Bloods. Excuse me. Let me not say Blue. It'd be cracking me up that I say Blue like that's his first name, but it's all one name, Blue Bloods. But I think it was between Blue Bloods and HBCU Nightly. I think that's the interaction. They were talking about how all of these jobs, or maybe it could have been inside HBCU football, BJ Jones. All great follows, by the way. But it was the idea that essentially every job is a stepping stone. And sometimes you can even look at those big name Power 4 schools as stepping stones to the pros for a lot of these coaches. And that's one of the reasons I don't like using the term stepping stone, because it's all about a ladder. Now, that being said, I do think that we look at the HBCU situation a little bit differently because some of these guys are coming in with no experience. And for some, it is a stepping stone. For Eddie George, I do not believe that it was. I think he learned to love coaching as it went on, and then he had new goals and new aspirations. But I don't necessarily know if this is any different than Willie Simmons taking a job as a positional coach and then moving his way up from there, because we all understand the game and guys want to level up and they want to go up the ladder. And quite frankly, the HBCUs are not at the top of the ladder. That's just the truth. Those who choose to stay at the HBCUs, they should be applauded. Those who decide to leave should not be booed or thrown tomatoes at. But I've always said this. I've never really liked the Deion Sanders comparisons with any of the other coaches with limited experience that came after him. I always thought comparing Deshaun Jackson or Michael Vick or even Eddie George to Deion Sanders was always lazy. Yes, they had the commonality of limited experience of being more of a known for being an NFL player as opposed to being a coach. Yeah, so they have that commonality that makes you want to group them together. But the truth of the matter is, I think Eddie George is a way easier path for everybody. And I don't even say easier, it's a way more realistic path for Deshaun Jackson and Michael Vick to follow. There's only one Deion Sanders. You got to understand, Deion is one of the most popular and known football players in my lifetime, and he barely played in my lifetime. So there's not many people who you could compare to him. And the truth of the matter is, I think Eddie George's path is the more likely scenario. Sanders came in and dominated the SWAC 2 years in a row and then got up out of there. Immediately dominated, essentially, if you take the spring season out. Do I think that Michael Vick or Deshaun Jackson is going to come in and immediately dominate the MEAC? I'll tell you this, they can't both do it at the same time. They can't both do it at the same time. So when I'm looking at these celebrity coaches, I'm going to tell you this. I think that Deion Sanders is the inspiration 100%, but I think that Eddie George should be the model if your plan is to go to the FBS level, because look at this way. Deion Sanders came in, excluding that spring season, had back-to-back SWAC championships and dominated the conference and then went to Colorado. Do I think anybody else is going to do that? I'm not predicting it. But then you look at Eddie George, who had one really, really good year, but he steadily built that program year after year. So we saw progress. I believe that's way more realistic. That's what you should actually be shooting for. That's why I've never tried to compare these guys to Deion Sanders, because like I've said, the only commonality is that they have more experience as an NFL player than they do as a coach. That is where you know them from. That's the commonality. But everything that went into getting this job, I do not think is the same. These guys had no experience. Deion had some experience. The likely outcome in your first couple of years, I doubt will be the same. Like, it's just too much. But Eddie George, that's doable. Eddie George came in and he was all right. Like, they were a solid team. They weren't even a playoff team until this year. But you built that program. And to me, that's what Michael Vick should be looking to do. That's what Deshaun Jackson should be looking to do. I'm not trying to advocate for them to leave, but the truth of the matter is most of them are probably having their eyes on bigger schools. We already know Michael Vick wants to go. He already said it. My plan is to go FBS. So we know exactly where his mentality is. And I appreciate that. I respect that, to be honest. I don't like it, but I appreciate and respect knowing it. I hated that he said it. I didn't think it was a good idea to say that, to be honest. Just because you ain't coached yet. You haven't even coached spring ball. That's maybe something you say after a year. But the truth of the matter is, that was, to me, Michael Vick coming out and saying before he's ever coached a game, before he's ever led spring ball, I don't think he might not have had but a handful of meetings before he made the comment that he's planning on going to the FBS level. That was a lack of understanding of the group that he was coming in to lead, as far as fan base wise. And then also, I just thought it was distasteful. But at the same time, I knew this. I appreciate the confirmation, and I'm not upset about it. That's how I feel about the decision to say it. I have no emotional reaction, just logical to me. But point being, if Michael Vick wants to leave, that's the way he will probably do it. 3 years, 4 years. And I've always predicted that. I never thought that Jackson or Vick was going to be gone in 2 seasons. Is one of the reasons why I've always said I would just go ahead and do Vick versus Jackson in Philadelphia year 3. I've said that. Now, granted, since they didn't do it the whole homecoming route, maybe you don't worry about it, but I still think a home and home neutral is solid. Maybe a home, then a neutral, or whatever, whoever has the home game this year. Maybe a neutral game next season would also make sense. But the point is, when you take the Eddie George route, you're probably going to get 3-4 years out of these guys, man. You're probably going to get 3 to 4 years. How do we feel about that? Are we accepting of that? Or are we? I think that this should be I think this should be the expected reality, is that I'm not expecting these guys to stay here forever. That quote by Eddie George, boy, that stung. He said, it's going to get better. It ain't happening right now. And most importantly, it's not happening fast enough. That's the truth of it. It wasn't happening fast enough on Eddie George's timeline, and he couldn't sit around and wait any longer. I don't expect Deshaun Jackson or Michael Vick to have more patience than Eddie George. Eddie George was already working with the school prior to going there as a head coach. So I think he had more reason to sit through a lot of other activities. Man, the first time they get a call to go somewhere, Vick and Jackson are out of here, in my opinion. In my opinion. We'll see though. Um, let's keep rolling because I have a question, and it's not related to Michael Vick, but it is related to the school that he's just joined, Norfolk State. How in the world did they get the number one seed? I'm still waiting for these answers. I haven't gotten yet, but I need to know because it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up with everything else that I've been told. So let's get into this as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything, no matter what it is, with 100% accuracy. All so you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On NFL. There's no other show that I would suggest for you to go to. No disrespect to the NBA, but I'm a football guy, so we're going to stay tapped in with NFL free agency. Make sure that you're checking out Locked On NFL today every single day for your second listen right after me. Yes, sir. Anyway, let's keep rolling. How did Norfolk State get the top seed on the men's side? These are questions that I need to be asked. I mean, to be answered because I've asked them. I don't really reach out to people. That's not really my necessarily my cup of tea. I need to do it more often. But I did reach out to Chip Washington, right? So shout out to Chip Washington. He hosts the Bison Brothers podcast, so he does a really good job there, and the Bison Brothers basketball podcast. So especially with the MEAC tournament starting right now, make sure you guys are giving him a listen. But I asked him, hey, how did Norfolk State get the tiebreaker? He said, we asked on the Facebook chat. No one's answered. I looked, right? And somebody had already asked. And then he follows up with inquiring minds want to know. Because people say, hey, what is the tiebreaker mentioned in the article that Norfolk State won? Because as you read how the tournament bracket is laid out, they say this right here. Norfolk State garners the top seed after winning the tiebreaker against South Carolina State. Norfolk State has claimed the regular season championship either outright or shared in 5 of the last 7 seasons. Then you go into South Carolina State and the 2 seed, and then you get to Delaware State. But that's it. That's it. You're not missing anything. I'm reading to you verbatim. They tell me that Norfolk State gets the top seed after winning the tiebreaker. But what is the tiebreaker? Now, the reason I'm curious is because I've said this. If they tied, South Carolina State will be the number 1 seed. Do I like being wrong? No, which is one of the reasons I'm probably pounding the table for this information. But secondly, and most importantly, this is a curious case because now I feel like we're being played with. And the MEAC is guilty of a lack of transparency. I was watching the Norfolk State versus Howard women's basketball game. Now, I would assume the MEAC tournament on the men's and women's side would have the same tiebreakers, have the same rules. They said if Howard beats Norfolk State, it would obviously be a tie, right? So if Howard beats Norfolk State by more than 16 points, Howard will be the number 1 seed. If Howard beats Norfolk State by less than 16 points, they will be the number 2 seed. And if they beat them by 16 on the dot, it will be a coin flip for the tiebreaker. I remember this not because I had to go back, because live, I thought to myself, why won't you put this on the website? And that's the MEAC's fault right here. This is the MEAC's fault. The tiebreaker should be readily on the website. That's how I know all the tiebreakers for the SWAC. And I'm not trying to sit here and compare the 2 conferences. All I'm saying is I know how one operates. It's crystal clear. You don't have to worry about, You don't have to worry about questioning. That's how I should say. You don't have to worry about questioning why one team would win, why another team would win. Because now we get into these situations. Let me explain. Let me get a little deeper, because now I feel like I'm asking questions that don't make sense without context. South Carolina State beat Norfolk State by 3 points. They lost to Norfolk State by 2 points. That premise that I just read off to you, or rattled off to you, about what happens if Howard would have beat Norfolk State by a certain amount of points, essentially what it means is, if Howard would have beat Norfolk State by more than Howard lost by the first time these two teams matched up, then Howard would get the number 1 seed. Okay, cool. When I read that, that tells me that the tiebreaker between two teams, only two teams, when the tiebreaker between two teams comes down to head, boom, that's checked off because it's a 1-1. The next thing is point differential. That's what it tells me. So then I apply that logic to South Carolina State and Norfolk State, and South Carolina State has the point differential. They won by 3, lost by 2. That would mean they would be +1. Norfolk State would be -1. So when I'm reading these things and I'm trying to put 2 and 2 together, I see South Carolina State as the number 1 seed. But I think therein lies the problem. I shouldn't have to put 1 and 1 together. I shouldn't have to put 2 and 2 together. It should be laid out for me plainly. I should be able to go to the MEAC website and say, what are the tiebreaker policies, and find that information. It should not be difficult to be found. It should not be hidden. And it doggone sure shouldn't be not on the website. We know we have tiebreakers on a yearly basis. It might not be every year at the top. Sometimes it's at the bottom. Sometimes it's in the middle, right? But we should know what the tiebreakers are. And it kind of does frustrate me, because this isn't a difficult thing to do. And when you don't have it, it has a lack of transparency. And when I have a certain understanding that is not held up, now I have to question if there's funny business going on. That's me personally. I have to question, did y'all just gift them a number 1 seed? Like, I don't know if it matters. You know, you're looking at the bracket and them being the number 1 seed. They play Maryland Eastern Shore versus South Carolina State, who has to play Coppin State. So yeah, you get the 3 seed. You get a different side of the bracket if you want to look at it that way. But you know, I prefer transparency. I don't like coming on this show and asking questions I don't have the answer to, unless I'm asking your opinion on how you feel about it. But if I'm not asking you your opinion, I don't like not having the answers, guys. That's not me. If you have the answer to this, please tell me. Like, I'm not trying to be purposefully ignorant. I'm not willfully ignorant here. What I am doing is simply saying the way the women's would have been decided is not the way it looks like the men's is being decided. And I think that should be a problem. And people want to know. I'm not the only one questioning this. I'm not the only one questioning this. I don't want to mess up how to say this person's name. They have a last name that on first sight, I know I would jack that up. So just things to be curious about. But let's preview the MEAC tournament as it is. Norfolk State, the 1 seed. South Carolina State, the 2 seed. I would love if somebody gave me the answers to that. But even if I don't, we still have a tournament to preview. Let's break it down as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by Factor. Looking to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options over 8 dietary preferences every week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, or Keto. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfast, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. I love how Factor takes the stress out of meal planning, because for me, one of the most difficult aspects of the whole thing is cooking the food, making time to actually do it. And I'm a busy person. So when it comes to having to do all of that, I get a little bit drained, and sometimes I don't cook my food and I go elsewhere because it's too daunting for me. 2 minutes. That's all I need with Factor meals. That's all you would need with Factor meals. So eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/lockedoncollege50 off and use the code lockedoncollege50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code lockedoncollege50 off at factormeals.com/lockedoncollege50 off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. As wrapping up today's episode of Locked on HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you, thank you. Let's wrap up with a look at the MEAC tournament because we do have a couple of things that I think are worthy of, yes, worthy of being broken down outside of just the controversy that I feel comes with the lack of transparency. I just want to know the rules. I'm sure there's a reason. I'm sure there's not no funny business, but please just let the tiebreakers be clear so I don't have to have these questions. Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference. Anyway, when it comes to the conference tournament, they're a little bit different than the big dance because I look at the middle of the big dance always. Like, what's the 7 and 8 seed? I think, or is it 8 and 9 going against each other? It's one of them. Like, I want to see those games because those are often much more tight matchups. I think it's 7, 10, 8, 9. Like those are tight matchups that you see as far as record. You don't see the spreads being as wide. Those are the more entertaining games to me. But that's at the conference level. It's not as much of a separation between two and the next group a lot of times. And the women's basketball, we'll see, is a drastic difference. But a lot of times, it's not that much of a difference. So it's much more competitive. It's much more anything can happen. And this isn't just for the MEAC or the SWAC or the CAA or the Big South. It's not just for that. You can go look at the SEC tournament or the ACC tournament over a 5-7 year time span. And what you'll see is that you'll have teams who are high ranking teams in the big dance who did not win their tournament. And sometimes they lost to a team that was not ranked higher than them in the tournament. So I just think that in general, that is a difference. But I'm still looking at the middle of the conference first. I just look at other games as well. I look at the 4 versus 5, which is Howard versus Morgan State on the men's side. Both of those teams are 7 and 7. In MEAC play. Howard beat them twice, so that's the tiebreaker. But they still got to play each other. It really didn't matter because it's a neutral site. It's a neutral site game, and they had the 4 and 5 seed. That's who they were going to be. So it's just a matter of, well, not even that. They were going to be on the same side of the bracket. So nothing really changed, but Howard beat them twice, and I want to see if they can do it a third time. Specifically a guy like Blake Harper. And it's not that I'm rooting for Howard or I want to see if they can do it, but it's hard to beat the team 3 times. It really is. But as long as Howard is in the MEAC tournament, I'll have my eyes on Blake Harper, the freshman sensation who has a really good shot at not being just the freshman or newcomer of the year, but also being the player of the year. He has 19. He's averaging 19 points a game. He's 4th in assists. He's 2nd in rebounds. He's doing a little bit of everything. But now the games mean more. Simple and plain, the games mean more. So when the MEAC tournament is going and the stakes are at their highest, Blake Harper, the freshman, can you perform at your highest? I'm not asking you for I don't even call it Cinderella, though that's what it feels like with the way Howard has been kind of dropping down, but they're still just a 4 seed. But can you go on a run? I'm not asking you to take them on a run, but I am asking for you to perform up to your standard when the lights are on you. Because I do think that this is a pressure moment now, and I need you to live up to the pressure as a freshman sensation. Now, on the women's side, can anybody mess with Norfolk State and Howard? Because the answer during the regular season is no. It's been Howard versus Norfolk State for the last 3 years. If anything of the regular season should be taken into account, it's going to be Howard versus Norfolk State for the 4th year in a row in the championship. It went those 2 teams. In 2022, Howard won. In 23, Norfolk State won. In 24, Norfolk State won. So we'll see what happens if these teams meet up again in the middle of or at the end of the MEAC tournament. But in general, that's what I want to see on the women's side. Norfolk State is 14-0, so that means nobody's beating them. Howard's 12-2. The only 2 losses they have came from Norfolk State. So no one's beaten either one of these teams, but who's gotten close? Howard has won games. I was about to say been beaten. Howard has won games by less than 15 points only 6 times this year. So, and when you compare it to Norfolk State, it's actually a drastic amount. But they beat Coppin State by 5, beat Coppin State by 10, beat Morgan State by 9, beat Maryland Eastern Shore by 13, beat Maryland Eastern Shore by 10, and they beat Delaware State by 8. So of everybody in the conference, outside of Norfolk State who just beat Howard, there's only 2 teams who have lost to Howard by less than 15 points. when we begin to talk about how many teams that you've beaten by less than 15 points, I think that's when we can start talking about how dominant that you've been. You look at the pure records, Norfolk State 14-0, Howard 12-2. Then you get to third and fourth place, which is Maryland Eastern Shore and Coppin State, ironically, who we just mentioned. They're 8-6. There's such a drop off from 1-2 to 3-4. It's difficult for me to sit here and act like there won't be a Norfolk State versus Howard part 4 in the conference tournament. I think that if either one of those teams lose, especially if Norfolk State loses, it'd be the upset of the year in HBCU basketball, genuinely, because nobody should see it coming. If Norfolk State loses, this is 100% the upset of the year because they've run through everybody. I talked about the teams who Howard has beaten by less than 15. The only people who have lost by less than 15 in Norfolk State are Morgan State, who lost by 8, and Howard, who lost by 12. If somebody other than Howard or Norfolk State knocks off one of those two teams, upset of the year, period. And I know it's the tournament. I know it's late. Upset of the year, no doubt about it. So tomorrow we'll be back with Eddie George's legacy, but I don't know what we'll follow it up with. But that will be the end of our Eddie George saga. Maybe Tennessee State will give us a head coach, and then we'll have something else to talk about on Friday, or maybe even Thursday we'll have something to talk about it. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But in the meantime, in between time, until the next time that we hear each other, family, because I really do appreciate this. Enjoy your MEAC and SWAC tournament. I know that I will. But in the meantime, in between time, like I was saying, until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care. Stay blessed. Peace.